Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menners, and coming to you from the Central Coast and the Emerging Cricket podcast, we have Daniel Beswick. Welcome back.
Evening, Menners, Damo. How are we?
Good, yes, and that's right. Coming to us from down south in Victoria, deep in Victorian territory, we have Damien Watson from SEN. Hello.
I'm surprised you didn't say I was from the dark side there, Metters, in that line. But good to be with you, New South Welshman.
I had to censor myself because I realised we had to do a whole podcast together. So that's what
you wait. It's like when you do any sort of interview, it's like putting the honey on the dart, the arrow. You sweeten it up and then you go bang.
Exactly. You know. All right. Well, we have so much cricket news to get to. We actually, the three of us, didn't get together last week. So we've got, there's so many talking points. We've had David Warner come back and then retire again. We've had all sorts of things. But let's start with, I guess, the news at hand. The Australian coach tenure has been extended. So unlike Justin Langer, he's been given more than a 5-month contract extension and will be coaching the Australian team through till the end of 2027. So a chance to defend the 50-over World Cup. Between now and then, we've got a couple of World Test Championship cycles. Well, the rest of this one and another one. Also a T20 World Cup. So I don't think it's a surprise. It's very, very popular amongst the playing group. And the reality is it's actually very hard to get high-level coaches. Like, you won't get a Ricky Ponting coaching a national team. So sensible appointment. Daniel, what do you think?
It's an incredibly tough job, and you need the prerequisites and the resume you have to have that role. I think, as you sort of implied, Manners, I think the short list or the total people that can fit the role, it's probably Andrew McDonald, and the rest of the list is very short. So it doesn't come as a huge surprise. I think we just spoke briefly before we started. The culture of the team looks to be in a pretty decent spot at the moment. The players seem to like what's going on. There's a few selection headaches. Yeah, perhaps. But the team has overall played quite well over his tenure, and I think there's no reason why it can't continue under him. And yeah, he's the best person for the job at this point.
Damien,
I tend to agree. I think you hit the nail on the head there, Daniel, because I think it does come down to maybe a little bit of a softer hand, as you mentioned, Metters, in this situation with the way things are in sport. And you've got to be a good people person. It seems like he ticks those boxes. I think he's still got scope for improvement as well as a coach. That's the other thing too. I think there's room for improvement there, and he's got an opportunity to do that over the next couple of years, shoring up the tactical side of things. But you're right, it's hard to find someone at a high level when you consider that a lot of ex-players, particularly the big names, they probably get more money in the media with less scrutiny. So why the hell?
Or the IPL, which is far less work. It's a couple of months.
Correct.
You're getting paid a fortune. I guess a couple of things on Andrew McDonald. I think he has a real challenge ahead of him because, as we've discussed, there's going to be a real changing of the guard. So, perhaps his greatest challenges are yet to come. And then this also gives the next level of coaches time to kind of upskill. So I'm thinking there of like a Tim Payne. He might be someone who would be a future national coach, even Dizzy Gillespie, who's with Pakistan at the moment. So there's options down the track, but yeah, no big surprise there. All right. Now, I've got some audio here. Marnus Labuschagne was on the SEN network, Damien, your fine establishment, but he was up at SEN Queensland with Patton Hills. And he was asked about sort of his captaincy of the Queensland team and his influences. And I thought his answer was very revealing. Have a listen.
Yeah, so I've certainly learned a lot, the likes of Uzi and a lot of my tactical stuff that I've learned over time from Steve. And, I thought Tim and Paddy have been great as well. So I've certainly had heaps of great leaders to learn from.
Mm.
So it felt there like he said Uzi and Steve Smith and then realised, oh, shivers, I better mention Tim Payne and Pat Cummins there. So, I think, it's been floated around that Steve Smith does sort of drive a lot of the tactics within the Australian team. And I guess, Damien, that comment would suggest that is true.
Well, I think you got to remember too, Steve, in the early days of Marnus's career, Steve probably to a degree at international level took him under his wing. So you got to remember they're similar types of, well, they have a similar type of role in the team, don't they? So I think there's an element of that too. You're naturally going to gravitate. Doesn't matter, whatever role you have, you're going to gravitate towards those who have a similar role, know where you're coming from, even if they're not the captain. So I think there's probably an element of that too. Wasn't it Ian Chappell, Daniel, a few years ago that said, Steve Smith's maybe treading on, or stealing everyone's thunder or treading on territory when it came to captaincy, even though he wasn't the captain?
Yeah, he was always the incumbent, wasn't he? And then we all know what happened next. How Freudian is this Freudian slip from Marnus, though? Looking at it, I mean, it's tough to say, but
so what does Freud have to do with it?
Oh, isn't it a Freudian slip when it's kind of au naturel and it's his subconscious there saying
maybe, yeah,
incestuous.
Yeah,
yeah.
I wouldn't go that far, but
I'm only joking.
Yeah.
I just came out of a movie all about the surrealists. It was called Lee, about the photographer. So there was a lot about Freudian stuff. So look, I'm just getting my wires crossed. Daniel, you continue. Don't mind me.
No, I don't have a lot to add. I think Damo sort of hit the nail on the head here. I think, Marnus having come in and obviously Steve was someone that he looked up to as a player. And I think it's fair to say that Steve probably does have some role in the field and in some sort of chain of command, albeit unofficially. I think it would be naive if anyone thought that he didn't. I think.
Well, question then. So there's a rumor that Pat Cummins will not be on the Sri Lankan tour, so he's due to have another child. Then he will either miss the one of the tests or most of the tests. So Daniel, do you think then Steve Smith should be the captain on that tour?
I would say yes. It's a question without notice, but I can't see why not now. It would have been 7 years on from when everything had happened in Cape Town, right? Give or take. So I think that is a punishment enough for everything that went on in that particular time.
It's funny, Metters, to interject. 7 years, I think, in some jurisdictions is the statute of limitations for when you can take action after slipping over or something like that. So we've reached the statute of limitations. 7 years come early next year. So, and there was the news recently about Dave Warner's leadership ban, wasn't it, as well, being lifted. So I think the water's gone under the bridge by the looks of things.
Yeah, and Steve has captained Australia in a couple of test matches at the last minute. I think 3, in fact. The Ashes test where Cummins had COVID, and then the 2 in India after he'd come home. But I think, going to Sri Lanka with the possibility of the World Test Championship final, in the balance, if Pat's actually going to come home early, as I said, I'd maybe say, Smith, you captain this tour, and Pat, come bowl in the first test, go home, which is 100%. He should definitely be here for the birth of his child, but just let Smith do what he does best. And people who saw him captain the team in India in 2023 say he was superb. And obviously, what we could see, he was superb. Just on that then, Damien, you were right. The David Warner leadership ban has finally been overturned. I don't think it's a coincidence it happened after David Warner finished international cricket. But, I think this is the right thing, and he can now coach within the Australian setup. He now captain a Big Bash team, and it's probably a little too late, but at least they've done it.
Yeah, I think, as you said, and as I said before, water's gone under the bridge since Cape Town. I know he probably hasn't universally grabbed the appreciation of the Australian public. He's still a pretty polarising figure, isn't he? So I don't know if he's ever going to be forgiven by the entirety of the Australian public. That's his nature. We'll discuss that maybe a little bit later on. Been in the news the last couple of weeks, but I think from the outside he seems to have matured a little bit. over the years too. I think that humbled him. That whole
Daniel's shaking his head. Daniel's one of those ones that holds a grudge.
I just think after everything that happened last week and him, whether or not it was tongue in cheek putting his hand up again, to be honest, I don't see it. But that's just me.
I'm probably more from a media point of view. I see your point. Yes, when he comes out and speaks to the media, I think there's probably an element where he tries to badger people. But I think within the confines, it seems like there hasn't been a huge amount, at least from what we hear on the outside. Has there been a huge amount of resistance towards him from his teammates or?
No. Apparently, a lot of people endorsed him. So Pat Cummins, Lisa Stalaker, there was a whole swathe of people who submitted evidence that he deserved to be given leadership responsibilities in the future and coaching and stuff. So I think you're right. He has changed, but so Daniel, you weren't a fan of him doing that last week. I mean, from a comedic sense, it's very funny.
Look, I both things aren't necessarily true at the same time, in that I think it was more than fair enough that his leadership ban was overturned, and I think he can actually be a really good mentor for the Thunder and what they're about and how they're going to drive into the future in BBL cricket. And I think he can teach a lot of people some new things and really be a key figure. And I think that's where I want to see that change. I want to see it in actions and not, like he's got a commentary gig with Fox. Oh, he's still playing. Oh, what's he doing? Like, oh, he's posted on Instagram. It's like, I don't know. I just feel like there's not a whole lot of continuity. I'm not sure like how much he enjoys sitting on the couch doing nothing. I think he's an energetic person. We all know that about him, and it's probably one of the reasons why he's been ultimately so successful at what he's done. But I don't know. I just think if you're taking the headlines away from the Sam Constances of the world and the future incumbents opening the batting, all to kind of poke this bear and sort of make it news again. I don't know. I don't really. Okay, it might have been a joke, but I mean, I think if it's misconstrued by anyone, then does it really get your humor across? I don't know. I'm not too sure on the whole thing.
Well, no one took him seriously. No one was interested in him coming back. Anyway, David Warner can't keep himself out of the headlines. I'm pretty sure News Corp would have been happy with it, and they initially ran the story. And considering they've employed him at Fox Cricket, they've got every reason to pump his tires up. They've started calling him the King, which was the Shane Warne's nickname, of course. So that's ridiculous. He's the Bull. And that's all he'll ever. That's what he will be. So. Anyway, Warner's back. Can't captain Australia, though. Too late for that. All right. I'm staying with the national news. We'll get to the opening debate in a second. There was a T20 squad announced during the week. They will play Pakistan in 3 games, and none of the test incumbents are there because they'll be getting ready for the India Test series. But there's a host of white ball stars: Glenn Maxwell, Josh Inglis, Matthew Short, Stoinis, Zampa, Aaron Hardy, Cooper Connolly. But they'll be playing 3 games against Pakistan, which I think is going to sort of fly under the radar. So Australia's supposed to play Pakistan in 3. Well, sorry, supposed to. It's not like they're going to get cancelled. They are going to play next week 3 ODIs against Pakistan, then 3 T20s. And I think considering the run up to the Test series is looming large, I can't imagine these white ball games will be covered or talked about in any great enthusiasm, apart from your cricket nuffies out there. What do you think?
It sort of reminds me of that 2022 T20 series where West Indies came out at the Gold Coast, which is already a graveyard for sport as a general rule, like outside of a couple of exceptions. But that series really did take a dive. And I remember the Caribbean sort of diaspora and the fans wondering, what the hell is going on in Australia? Why is no one at this game or at this series? And it was just every single bad variable was pushing towards that series not being particularly great for viewers, for the rights holders, for the fans, and ultimately for the players. And unfortunately, I can't see this one being too different because we've got basically the best part of 2 years before the next T20 World Cup. There's no context really around this T20 series coming up. the matches don't really mean a terrible lot. The T20I rankings don't mean anything in the context of these two teams in terms of World Cup qualification or anything like that. So, look, yeah, you're going to have to find some pretty nailed on people to really sit down and enjoy every single ball of this particular series with everything else going on, the lead up to the Border Gavaskar Trophy, the WBBL, which has more context and more storylines centered around it. I think it's actually going to really struggle in the framework and the ecosystem of Australian cricket.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think we'll get more people potentially. You mentioned that West Indies series in 2022, Daniel. The West Indies, of course, came out here as well earlier this year in the calendar year. And there was that famous picture of the MCG when they had I think it was the one day between Australia and the West Indies. And I don't think they claimed there were 9,000 there. I'm not even sure if it was that much, to be honest with you. And compared to what it was back in the day, I know we're talking about T20 more specifically, but, it shows you what the implications, I think, of it being behind a paywall. I think it was that 2019-20 summer where we first sort of really felt that when Pakistan came here for a T20 series. And wasn't there a T20 that was washed out and they were debating, what's the point? They played like a 7 over each match, basically, because it was rain affected and barely anyone turned up. And that was when we sort of first had this discussion. And now it's sort of the norm, unfortunately, when it comes to one-day international series and T20 series when they're pretty compact. I guess one thing that's going for it is it's the first series of international fixtures, this one-day and T20 series in the lead up to the Border Gavaskar Trophy. So at least there's a hunger there for international cricket locally. So maybe you'll get a few more on that basis as opposed to being in the back end of the summer. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see huge crowds or anything like that.
Yeah, I know I'm naive, but it just doesn't feel right to me that these games are behind a paywall. I understand the nuances of the TV deal, and I do understand the economic realities that if News Corp are going to pay, $1 billion for the rights, they need some exclusive content. I get all that, but it still doesn't change the reality. It's bad for those games. It's bad for those forms of cricket. They kind of feel irrelevant. And as I said before, these games used to be marquee games, and I think there's a middle ground. Like, there's no way they would be this invisible if they were on free to air. There's just no way.
I think too, and this is maybe the old person in me here, but the men's international summer to me feels like it's truly begun when the first ball of Test cricket is bowled, and it's great to have the limited overs cricket in January and February when you're kind of desperate for every morsel of international cricket you can get because the Test series is over. And I'm sure, we might be in the minority thinking about it like that. But at least with the Test matches, not only is there a Border Gavaskar Trophy up for grabs, there's World Test Championship points on the line. And then you get to January, and I know the BBL's kind of taken a lot of that part of the calendar. But yeah, that's when you used to be desperate for a little bit more international cricket. So I can see why they've had to wedge it in when they have, because the calendar now is not what it used to be. I just think there might be a case of maybe being somewhat methodical and a bit more traditional in how you sort of go about putting together your international calendar for the summer.
I think the landscape has changed a bit, though, Daniel, compared to maybe 20 or so years ago, because, as you said, I think the BBL has now taken away that, unless you get maybe in England or India, it's taken away that enthusiasm for the one-day and T20 internationals. I think it works better when you are playing. There was, I guess, a great anticipation surrounding a triangular series. Not saying we bring that back necessarily, because no one's going to turn up to games that Australia's not involved in, but there was something to play for in a sense. And also the landscape's changed. The Australian Open's becoming more and more popular, you could argue. The tennis, that takes over I guess, the attention span of a lot of sports fans out there. And let's be honest, the footy codes are rising in popularity as well. Come February, most people are tonguing for football and talking about bloody number one draft picks nowadays. So, yeah, the landscape has changed a little bit. But I see your point, but I don't know if it'll make a huge amount of difference if you had it in January and February, given what we saw last summer.
I know it's been a pie in the sky idea that many people have had already, so I'm not going to claim to be the original here. But thinking about it, you've got Pakistan out here, and then you have India out here. Could you just imagine what a Pakistan, India,
tried.
Australia triangular series would
tried.
have looked like?
True.
Yeah, I'm not surprised because
Yeah.
I know it's impossible, but goodness
Yeah,
me,
there won't.
that's
I think
content.
Cricket Australia could see the millions that were just waiting for them if they could get it over the line. I don't mind where they're actually playing them this year. I think it's fine as a run into the summer. I just think this is not this year specific. It was what Damien was saying, that we've had 6 years of it being behind the paywall now, and they've just over time just faded from relevancy.
Yeah.
Just on fixturing while we're there, interesting article in News Corp today that next year's Australia Day, January 26th, they will not be playing any games of cricket on that day. Now, it's been controversial. Obviously, that day is complex and challenging for a lot of people. So there's always issues around playing sport on that day. Some people don't mind, some people are against it. But next year, they're not actually playing on that day because the Australian Open finals on. And I think the Big Bash will be played the day after. So they get to avoid that little hurdle. I think they will be playing the next year. But, I mean, what can they do about this? Because my opinion is they're sort of caught in the middle here. Until the government acts and actually makes a national day a more appropriate date that everyone can be proud of, then Cricket Australia is always going to be caught in this sort of minefield where they hate to put a foot wrong, which means you never put a foot right.
I've got to say, I'm all for CA if they're going to take that stand, and it's one that personally I'd probably agree with. I think that the day should be moved here in Australia for what it is and for what it represents, because it doesn't represent everybody. And I appreciate Cricket Australia is moving and making that stand, as long as they're consistent with that stand now, and as long as everyone sort of gets on the same page to say, look, we're not going to play on this particular day. We've got weekends, we've got school holidays almost coming up, basically to the end of that month of January anyway. So realistically, that outside of their own logistical and scheduling issues with all the cricket going on and the Australian Open, as you mentioned, yes, it's their own problem to deal with. But I would respect CA and be for more what they want to be, with them carrying on and keeping consistent rather than bailing out on their beliefs for extra dollars, because there's also no guarantee that if you play on January 26th, that people buy into going to the cricket on January 26th for exactly the same reason. So I think because it's so divisive, you're probably losing out already, no matter if you do play on that particular day. So yeah, I'm all for it, Damo. I'm guessing you probably think of a similar sort of opinion, but I don't want to put words in your mouth at the same time.
No, I think that's fair. If it is a logistical nightmare to, I suppose, avoid having it on that day, and they have to, if it has to fit in that just the way the fixturing works out, that they have to put something on that day, you can still do it without recognising Australia Day, I think. You don't have to do any ceremony or anything like that. Most people, I don't know, maybe we're talking society in a societal sense here, but I think most people just treat it as a day that you have off and you just go and watch sport or go out to the beach anyway. I don't think anyone
I wish
really...
it was that simple, Damien, because there's a lot of people who are strident one way or the other.
Yeah.
So it's sort of tough for Cricket Australia. But just on that, Damien, they did that, I think, last year. They scheduled the Australian women's national team playing on January 26th. And they were like, well, we just had to play today. It was just like any other day. So, but they couldn't even get away with it then. Anyway, they say cricket is a reflection or a mirror of society, and I think you see it in this situation right now, where you see the division around this day being played out, over playing a game of cricket on a date.
I'm putting my hand up here and saying that Australia Day, just thinking about it right now, should be a date in the middle of November that we always have the first day of men's international test cricket on. There you go. The weather's warm enough.
Cricket Day.
It's a random Thursday in
Yeah.
November. You can call
And
it whatever you want.
I think we need a new national anthem, and we need that stinking Union Jack off our friggin' flag. You know, if the Johnny Bairstow incident has taught us anything, they hate us. Just remember that they hate us, so we should take the Union Jack off our goddamn flag.
You want a referendum, Menace? The Republican
Yes,
referendum.
Absolutely. Yep. Let's get going. But let's start with ripping off at least change the flag. I understand there's some political benefits to being part of the Commonwealth. When you're a small island in the Pacific, you need to keep everyone on side. But anyway, look, let's take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to talk about another national debate. I was going to say way more important, but that definitely not. But it is very important right now in the cricket landscape, and that is who is going to open the batting in the first test. You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menas. I'm with Damien Watson and Daniel Beswick, and it is that time of the show. Yes, we are talking about who is opening the batting for Australia. It's a national game. Everybody's playing it. Join the fun with the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. So, bingo, bingo, bingo. We've had some updates since the last show. Inglis will not open. George Bailey has said that. So you can throw that one out. That was Daniel's idea. George Bailey didn't like it. And it seems like Cameron Bancroft and Marcus Harris will open in the first Australia A game. Consis is due. They're not sure exactly where he'll bat. McSweeney, maybe he's going to bat 3. So it would appear Bancroft and Harris are just in front of everybody else in the opening debate. And maybe Harris is just the front of Bancroft. Damien, you're down in the action in Victoria. Is that the way you read it? Harris has maybe got his nose in front at the moment?
Maybe by a fraction, maybe by a piece of skin, but I think there's been a bit of dialogue that Constance could potentially go in. I saw Jamie Cox, the former Tasmanian player, have his say on it, and Merv Hughes joined in as well and echoed his sentiment that they should bring a younger player in, because at the end of the day, if you're going with an older player, within a couple of years, you're going to have the same problem and the same debate anyway. Why not blood a younger player and give them international exposure? I guess the counter argument to that is, well, is he ready for it? Is he ready to be as consistent as he can be at international level off the back of one game where he absolutely start? So it's an interesting one. I'm not sold on Harris just yet. He wasn't overly great. Yeah,
just on Harris. He's only 32. I think people are a bit caught up in. I know he's not a spring chicken, but if he were to come back and do well, he could play 4 or 5 years of Test cricket. I mean, Khawaja is almost 40, so I feel that they're sort of overplaying his age. He's not 35. If he comes good, he could still play 30, 40 Tests.
I agree with you there. I was just saying that seems to be the dialogue that I've seen. But, yeah, we saw that with Mike Hussey as well. He didn't really get a real go at the Australian level until he was well into his 30s and was sensational and became an iconic figure. But I'm not sold on Harris just yet off the basis of what I've seen so far. I know he scored a century against Tasmania. And I think he's batting better than he was 12 months ago. But I think we still need to see some scores to reflect that going forward. And this is a big opportunity for him after, there were a couple of times where he was dismissed. Wasn't he down the leg side against New South Wales? You just wonder whether that's going to be an issue for him going forward or whether it was just an aberration. But he's got some further opportunity. If he can make some big scores in the Australia A series, he puts himself firmly in the frame. But I'm not sold on him just yet.
Daniel, what do you think?
Something is eating away at me.
Here we go. Crazy idea coming. Here we go.
No. I think for some reason, I think Cam Bancroft gets a game over Harris at some point. Well, for the first test, I should say. I'm probably on Team McSweeney more than a lot of people as well. I'm cooling off on the Constance chat, at least for now, for reasons we might be able to get to maybe a little bit later. But
Just on
I think-
McSweeney, he made a
Yeah.
dazzling century in one-day domestic cricket on the weekend. So just flowing on from his Shield century, he's putting together a little form run, and I like him too, Danny. Like if he scores big runs for Australia A, he could definitely leapfrog Harris and Bancroft.
Yeah, so I don't have any inside mail or anything, but I know people who
I
are
know
sort of
that.
involved in McSweeney's camp, and they're obviously quite high on the idea, and they've sort of told me sort of in brief contact they're obviously look they say he's like obviously a great character. Of course they're going to say that being sort of representatives of him, but the little things that I've picked up on sort of around the traps, he leads that South Australian team as well. They've earmarked him for higher honours and have for a while. Under 19 World Cup representative. I think there's a lot pointing in the direction of him potentially being a key figure of the Australian team at some point down the road.
Agree.
And I would actually say, even if it's moving into somewhat of a different spot, him opening the batting, with all of that credited to him, I would take him over Constas despite Constas's form if we were to sort of pick the team tomorrow and it was between those two. I'm not saying it is, but I think that, Constas was dropped in that Shield game by Alex Carey, actually, of all people, in one of those particular innings in that dual 100 first class match as well. But yeah, look, for some reason, it's eating away at me that Bancroft will get picked, but you never know.
Well, look, my observations around this whole little race for the opening spot is it's kind of wide open. That, as I said before, if you come home with a wet sail and score big runs for Australia A, then you will take the lead, whether that's Harris, even a Bancroft, a McSweeney, a Constas. Like, it's there to be taken. But reading between the lines and the way Bailey has selected and the way they've always selected, I feel Harris, because he was kind of the last opener they had with the team, will just be ahead of everybody else, because they do like to respect pecking orders. They do like to reward players for a lot of consistency. So I think that's why I put him just in front of everyone. But I agree with both of you that he's not that far in front that a Constas or a McSweeney couldn't overtake him and take the spot. It's a fascinating little run to the finish line, because it's there to be taken. I just think that Khawaja is going to retire soon, so there's no actual reason. Like, they could pick Harris now and thinking, look, we'll just give Constas or McSweeney another summer to hone their game. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I still think we need to be in a win now mentality, and to bring up Constas again. I was wondering that there was something that during the Under-19 World Cup I couldn't work out what I didn't particularly like about his game, and then the light bulb moment was Mel Farrell on Twitter, who actually saw a lot of Constas at that Under-19 World Cup. She commentated on the event, and it was the fragility against the in-swinging new ball. He was castled multiple times at that tournament. I remember one particular dismissal, I think it was against Namibia, that wasn't particularly good looking. And all I can think about now is Jasper Bumrah and what he brings to the table. And that's all he's going to be doing, is honing in on the three pegs bowling with that angle and his action in towards the right-hander. I think just on that matchup alone, you just can't afford Australia being one wicket down for inside 10 every single time. And there's a potential of that's going to happen with almost whoever we put in this particular spot. But I think in terms of a trust now situation, I think that's why Bancroft and Harris might get the go-ahead. Maybe there's something in Bancroft's game that helps him get a little bit tighter towards the stumps with the ball swinging into the right-hander, and it just breaks up that the opening combination, rather than going with two left-handers with Harris and Khawaja with the ball swinging away. Talking about Bumrah's natural shape. That's just sort of my thinking at the moment anyway.
Interesting. Well, Australia A plays India A in Mackay starting tomorrow, Thursday, Australian time, and then next week at the MCG. So they are going to be cracking fixtures. And as I said, I think it's there to be won, the opening spot. All right. Some big news in Australian cricket. A hero of mine, Matthew Wade, has retired from international cricket again. So for those following closely, will know after Australia won the 2021 T20 World Cup, he retired from international cricket. It was a quiet retirement, but it certainly happened. I'm sure we could go through. The internet never forgets. But then George Bailey had a quiet chat with Wade and said, look, we actually might need you in the Australian team. There's a lot of series the senior players won't be available for, and we want you to play in the team. And then he's captained Australia in both white ball formats. I mean, Matthew Wade has had an immense career. There's nothing he hasn't done. He played as a wicketkeeper batsman. He played as a batsman. He's bowled in international cricket. He's won the T20 World Cup. So a phenomenal servant. At domestic level, he won everything with Victoria before he played international cricket. So he is retired. He will become part of Australia. He will form part of Australia's coaching staff for the upcoming series against Pakistan. But not a shock, Damien, but a servant of Australian cricket has retired.
Yeah, absolutely. Very entertaining on his day. Some argued that maybe he wasn't as consistent as he could have been, but I think on his day he was very, very entertaining, particularly at first class level. I got to see him at the MCG a few times, and he was absolutely barnstorming in his approach. He didn't deviate away from his natural game too often either, so he had the courage of his convictions to play an attacking style, and was very, very good in that respect. Probably the one innings that stands out for me, I don't know why, but it does, was the New Year's Test in 2013, I reckon, against Sri Lanka, where he made that quick fire century in the pink test. I remember that, and he jumped in the air with delight when he scored his century. Very, very quick fire. So, yeah, that's one that stands out for me in terms of a memory.
Daniel?
I just appreciate he was more than happy to fulfill any role Australia needed him to play. And I think the 2021 T20 World Cup is kind of an embodiment of that, when for quite a while, and even during that T20 World Cup, we were asking ourselves, who's our finisher? Who's Australia's finisher? We're looking for an Andre Russell. We're looking for a big brute of a hitter in the death overs who can come in from ball one. And we never really had it. Tim David had sort of firmed as someone who is going to play that role, Marcus Stoinis as well. But for Matthew Wade to come in and play the way he did in that semi-final against Pakistan, and then to go on as a T20 World Cup champion, that can never be taken away from him. And I think it'll be quite significant looking back, in decades, looking back to now and seeing how significant that win was. Because, for Australia at that point, and in the T20 game, I think we were actually probably a little bit slow on the uptake for T20 cricket. You remember when we first played international T20 cricket and we were in the retro gear, or we had the nicknames on the back of our shirts. I don't think we really took the format as incredibly seriously as everyone else did in the early days. And for us to kind of have that sort of eating away at us, not winning a T20 World Cup, and for him to be play such a key role in that tournament, I think nothing can sort of take that away from him. And he made Ashes hundreds, that 2019 series. He was important for Australia as well, and was just able to kind of do it wherever they sort of needed him to. Again, the consistency, as you point out, Damo, is probably maybe a talking point of his international career, but I think we can be very grateful for everything that he sort of brought to the Australian team. He certainly was one to sort of give all of himself to the Australian team and to the crest on the shirt as well.
I mean, it's a great story. He was dropped as wicket keeper and then said, I'll just come back as a batter. And he did it. He went away. And, people talk about him being, as one of the most formed batters in the country leading up to that 2019 Ashes series. So to think, he dropped as a keeper and was able to work his way back as a specialist batter. He also went in one stage and worked on a building site and was going to give up cricket. And, this was before his return. So, it's a wonderful story. Looking at his test record, 4 test centuries, 36 test matches. I would say about half of those he was keeping and half of those played as a specialist batter. 97 ODIs with 1 century, 11 half centuries, and 92 T20 internationals with 350s. So, just a wonderful player, and did it all. And as you say, Daniel, was very important in Australia retaining the Ashes in 2019. So, Yeah, I'm hoping to get him on the podcast. Bit of a hero of mine. Someone I've always looked up to. So hopefully get him on and have a chat about his career. He's now going to play some domestic T20 cricket around the world, T10 competition, IL T20. He'll play for the Hurricanes. So we'll still see more of Matty Wade. But yeah, he's retired again. All right. One more bit of news before we get into the WBBL. There was the most amazing collapse in the one-day domestic cup.
Yes.
This was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Western Australia were playing Tasmania. Were 2 for 52, all out 53. They lost 8 for 1. It was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Records-wise, it's the second biggest collapse in cricket history. I think there's one sort of women's game where the collapse was worse than that. It's hard to believe. But so it was the worst collapse in cricket history by Western Australia, a powerhouse. I mean, I don't know if either of you saw this. It was jaw-dropping. They lost 8 for 1.
Bereft of words, to be honest. I saw it in the notes in the build up to the show, and what can you do or say? It makes me think of that Sydney Thunder BBL innings. Where was it 15, and Jason Sanger actually handled that really well when he said, look, like you can't even really get too angry, because even if you play bad, like normally you put together an innings of 50, 60, I don't know. It's just an aberration. Like you're almost more unlucky to just have to be skittled that badly. To lose 8 for 1, again, as you said, barely seen anything like that before. And it's not as if they're a bad side too, but it's almost one of those ones. It's just an aberration. You almost get on the team bus or you get in the car and you just say, look, cricket gods weren't on my side today. And knowing WA, like they'll probably come back and win the competition now after all of this. But what do you do? I mean, it's just one of those things where the ball just seems to be moving, 2 inches past the bat every single time. And it's a 1 in a million scenario. Like it's just, you just lost the equivalent of winning the lottery, but on the opposite end, if that makes any sense. You've just been struck by lightning. That's basically what it is.
It's just a game of momentum, isn't it? It reminded me, Menners, have you ever seen the footage? I think it was I don't know if it was called the McDonald's Cup back then, but the one-day domestic comp in the 70s when didn't WA have to defend a total of 77 against Queensland, and Dennis Lilly and some of the attack there at WA managed to do it and bowled Queensland all out for 62. So that was when they used to pack out some of those stadiums as well for those one-day domestic games. I've got the record that you referred to, Menners, as well. Rick Findlay actually alerted me to this on Twitter. He says there's only one match that rivals this collapse. In 2019, is it the Maldives or Maldives? How do you pronounce it?
I'm fortunate to have been there, the Maldives.
Maldives,
you,
yeah.
Daniel.
The Maldives women's team, who he claims are near neighbours of WA, went from
They share an ocean. They share an ocean, Damo.
Correct.
And a batting collapse.
They were 1 for 7, and they were bowled out for 8 against Nepal. Who knows? Maybe Daniel was commentating that game. I'm not sure. And there were 7 extras in that total of 8.
Oh, yeah. Knowing my record, I probably would have tipped them on that particular day.
9. So they lost 9 for 1. Anyway, that is okay. That's just incredible. And like, I don't think you can compare it to anything. I don't think like that game with Lily and that was a whole different gravy. Like this is just incredible. Anyway, there's nothing to say about it because it was just the fact that it was like the Marsh One Day Cup. So it's just the one day domestic cup. I was brainwashed commentating last summer. That domestic, it's a good competition. Like you should never see 8 for 1 in any competition, let alone, WA, who've won the last 2 tournaments.
It's just luck. Like you could go out in that scenario and just swing at every ball, and on another day they'd probably knock off another 200. Like it's just one of those weird things. Or you could line up, 8 of the most village club players you've ever seen in your life, and they make more than one. Like it's almost so bad. It's
You
not a
or I
reflection of
edge
it.
one. I'd be
Yeah,
able to get
exactly.
Pat Willow on one of those. No way
Yeah.
Bo Webster's getting me out. That's a lie. He would definitely get me out. All right, we're going to take a break and then we'll be back. We have got some huge international news to talk about. England have been up to their old tricks again. India with a shock result. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menas. I hope you've enjoyed your drinks break. Joined by Damien Watson and Daniel Beswick. We've got some big international news to get to and some pommy bashing, so stay tuned. But before that, the WBBL has started in Australia. I was lucky enough, I went out to North Sydney Oval on Tuesday night and saw the Strikers and the Sixers play each other. The Strikers won, really quite a close game. Elise Perry has started in fine form, made a blistering half century. Scottish wicket keeper, is it Sarah Bryce?
Sarah Bryce, yeah.
They made a lovely half century. And one for you, Daniel, for as a fan of associate cricket. You know, one stage you had Sarah Bryce batting. She was batting with Elsa Hunter, who played for Malaysia, she's 19 now. I commentated on a game of her playing women's Premier Cricket 5 years ago. She has blossomed into a fine cricketer. It's incredible how much she's come on. And they were facing Anesu Mushangwe.
Yeah,
That's
so
good.
massive emerging cricket areas here. To Elsa Hunter, 6 years ago when the Emerging Cricket podcast started, we'd heard about this Xiao Xin Yi, which is her. I'm not sure if it's a name on her passport or it's her Malaysian name, but Xiao Xin Yi on the scorecards. And anyway, someone, I can't remember who tipped us off, was like, oh no, she's in Parramatta. Like, she's from Sydney. Her name's Elsa. So, all right, what's the crack here? And then sure enough, it would have been the same time as you mentioned there, man, as just, knocking about in grade cricket and just seeing this player obviously become the player that she is now, 19. And some of the shots he played in that knock the other night, the flick over on the leg side was just, just stand up.
This is not the Emerging Cricket podcast.
No, but it's great to see. But I'll stop there.
Anyway, so the WBBL is back. It's season 10. It was great to get out there, actually. A couple of things. Phoebe Litchfield is a skipper of the Thunder. It's not a bad thing to give a young player some experience like that. I'm normally against it, but when I sort of reflected on it, the WBBL is so short. You're only asking him to do it for 6 weeks. So it'll tell us a bit about Litchfield's character. She made a half century, I think, in her first innings, or got close after being given a captaincy. So that's a good sign. The real star, Kiva Bray, the football player and the cricketer, who's only 15, playing for the Sixers, hit a boundary to win the Sixers' first game. They're injury depleted. She's such a great athlete. She could play probably football or cricket representative level. She's playing cricket at the moment. So that's a really interesting story. The WBBL is back. But I think as well, before we get into, I know you've got a question here, Daniel. It's the 10 years of the WBBL, and it sort of gave me pause to reflect on it. But Damien, how do you reflect on 10 years of the WBBL?
I think there's certainly a lot to be proud of in terms of the way that, in my view, Australia has pioneered the way that women's cricket can be marketed and attract a number of players from across the world. We were really the first to absolutely capitalise upon that and really push it. And now it's been, you can almost say, bettered, but also matched all over the world with a number of competitions. I was lucky enough to be part of it for a couple of seasons, calling it, and really enjoyed the competition. And the ratings are good. I think it could be marketed still a little bit more than what it is at the moment. I think there could be a way to attract more crowds. I think it deserves to attract a few more crowds. I know you've got the compact nature of the tournament, but I think there's room for improvement for it to try and make sure that it's still around the top echelon of cricketing competitions, women's cricketing competitions around the world. Because you've got the women's IPL now, you've got the hundreds that are attracting pretty good crowds, you've got to say. I know you're not a big fan of the 100 metres as a concept, but there's ways, I think, in which they could market it more, in my view. There's some great stories that are already coming out of it this season. So hopefully the TV audiences are pretty good because it's in a bit of a zone where it gets its own window. But I think there's a way you can attract more and more people. It's hard when it's, I guess, not school holidays. That probably does make a difference.
There was about 1,400 people at North Sydney Oval last night, which I think is really good on a Tuesday night during school term. That's a really good turnout. But you're right. Daniel, how would you sum up the, 10 years of the WBBL?
Yeah, just to kind of quickly piggyback on the points that you guys made, I think with Channel 7's digital rights changing a little bit, it probably makes it a little bit easier for the matches to be streamed. And from a marketing point of view, I look at what the Matildas brand has been over the last 5 years in Australia when, I mean, ultimately, yes, they performed quite well in their World Cup last year, but I think they probably have under-delivered based on the hype that there is for them, arguably. And in comparison, this Australian women's team is one of the greatest, not only the greatest cricket teams of all time, one of the greatest sporting teams in women's history across any sport. And I think, I mean, that's your selling point. And we're making the future. And when you talk about what it's like 10 years down the track, I look at what's happened at this particular tournament as a great kind of barometer of what the WBBL has been over the last 10 years, where we had one Elise Perry 10 years ago. And now I look around at the teams and I'm starting to think like we've got 10 Elise Perrys potentially. Like, and
that's a bit of a stretch. I mean, we don't have 10 Elise Perrys.
We don't know that yet. But
we've got some very good cricketers. But I mean, Elise Perry's like the greatest, arguably the greatest cricketer we've ever produced.
Yeah, but we're not.
I know what you're saying. There's like a lot of talent coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I would say, okay, maybe Elise Perry is the GOAT, but like when golf had the same conversation when Tiger Woods went away and everyone's like, oh, who's going to be the next Tiger? You look at what the PGA and golf had become where, the Schefflers, Justin Thomas when he was good, Jordan Spieth, they're all in the framework of Tiger Woods. They're all
I'll give you a better one. 10 years ago, if you'd ask an average punter in the street, name a female cricketer, they've gone Elise Perry, and then they're probably
maybe Meg Lanning. That's
yeah. Now, I reckon an average punter who's half interested in cricket could rattle off 10, 15 names.
Yeah, but did we see as many young players step up in the WBBL that we've had so far, like a week into the WBBL? Like, we're not even judging this season based on a whole season. We're judging this season based on 1 week of games. Kiva Bray. I mean, like even players like Hannah Darlington 3 years ago, we thought were like going to be the next thing. Like Phoebe Litchfield's now taken the captaincy at the Thunder off Hannah Darlington. Like that wouldn't have happened 5 or 6 years ago. Like, I think we're just
we're seeing the result of 10 years of professional cricket. Like there's young women that have been in the system now for a long time, and we're seeing the fruits of that. That, as you say, if our Australian team got food poisoning, couldn't play, and they rolled out the second 11, probably still win most games.
No doubt. Yeah, I just think again, I think if you look 5 years ago, you've got the one or two really key players carrying a lot of the responsibility and the workload of WBBL teams. And there were still players batting 9, 10, 11 in WBBL teams that didn't bowl. There were still examples of that 5 years ago. So yeah, it's just, we just don't have that in our situation anymore. It's good that we've got some competition now through the 100 and the WPL to push us along. But, us being standalone from the men's product, I think bodes really well for what the WBBL is. And again, it probably goes back to Damo's point at the start. Could we really harness this level of quality a bit better and to showcase it? Because you've got some of the world's best players on your doorstep, and you've got the best players of the next 5 to 10 years on your doorstep as well. And the sprinkling of the gun international overseas players who are coming back from the T20 World Cup as well.
And it's entertaining to watch, Ben. I ask, again, it's a small sample size, but I ask a number of people. They say the WBBL is far better to watch than AFLW, for instance, or it does have that good TV audience because it's something you could easily sink into. Yeah.
And it's really worked that they've got the same brands, obviously, as the men's teams. And, you get people just identifying with the Sixers and the Thunder. And, that really works with young people. And, I sort of think about 10 years of the WBBL, and I think, it's been amazing to see the game start off. Those first couple of years were, pretty ropey. You're playing on small, like some of the grounds were just suburban grounds. They were playing
Double
sometimes
header?
like double headers at 10
Yeah.
a.m. in the morning. And it, the standard of cricket was far lower than it is now. I mean, women's cricket's improved, but it's really changed since then. It's the standards really improved to now. You've got stadium series, you've got big games, like they feel like big events. I mean, it is become one of the biggest sporting leagues in Australia. I think it's 4th or 5th rated in terms of TV viewership. So, it is a really successful competition. And I guess I'd like to applaud them for this year. They've cut back from 14 games to 10 games. And I think one thing that Cricket Australia probably learnt from the Big Bash is they cut back too late, and the ship had already sailed and players had gone to other tournaments. Whereas with the WBBL, they've actually got out in front, because I actually think they could have gone a couple more years playing 14 games and people would have still come. But what they've tried to do is make sure that, hey, if we cut it down now, we will remain competitive and no one will even have a chance to go somewhere else.
Maybe some early revisionist history, but is that almost pointing to the point that the Spring Challenge really did serve its purpose, because they had the 4 games taken away from the WBBL? They put them there to give maybe some of the younger players or the developmental players a chance to play, quote unquote, enough cricket over the course of the summer without taking away from what the WBBL ultimately is, albeit with 10 matches for their season.
Yeah. Interesting. I've lined up to talk to Nick Cummins from Cricket Victoria. So he was the architect of the Spring Challenge. So I'm going to talk to him next week and I'll report back on that, because my issue is I haven't spoken to one of the players that wanted the Spring Challenge. So,
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Nick if he asked the players. But look, let's park that. I will get answers. I'm going right to the top.
Journalism.
Nick's been on the show before. Journalism, that's it. That's what it's called. All right. And now we've got some big international news. Pakistan defeated England in the test series. So that's right. After the first test, I was here saying this England team is unstoppable. It is wrong. They are stoppable on turning wickets. And Pakistan produced 2 raging turners, won the series 2-1. And, what was infuriating afterwards was the reaction of the England media, and to a lesser extent the England team. There was a lot of excuse making from the England team about the conditions, but in the interviews I heard, they were fairly measured, and you can't argue with the fact they were thrown challenges. But now I'm going to play some audio here from Jonathan Agnew on what is supposed to be the national broadcaster in England. Listen to what he is saying, and listen to when he suggests the result should have an asterisk because the conditions weren't to their liking. Listen to this idiot.
Very unusual cricket.
We have, but you will, no doubt, when you're reading in 50 years from now, results, when you're still there commanding your chair, doing your set, there will be a caveat, I suspect, about these 2 test matches that you will say, but don't forget you'll say that one in Multan was played on a worn pitch, never been done before, and who could forget all those patio heaters and everything else preparing the Rawalpindi. But I mean, stats just need sometimes that little bit of an asterisk.
They do need context. Yeah. So they're looking at the 2 first innings, 267 and 344. That's not particularly outlandish for a test. Obviously, it gets harder in the second innings, but actually there were more runs scored in the first innings combined here than in the last test on this ground.
All right, so I left in Zoltzman at the end because he's actually sort of fighting back a bit there in his very polite English way. Can you believe Agnew said the result should have an asterisk? Like, by any measure, England just played shit. They failed to adapt to the conditions. Sure, they were turning pitches. Does that mean Australia's loss in India last year are asterisk because the pitches weren't like at home? I mean, this is why the English drive me nuts. Like, to say that they should have an asterisk is so insulting to the Pakistan team. And the Stokes dismissals of him trying to slog everything out of the ground until he just left a straight one. Anyway, someone jump in here because I'm getting emotional. I'm getting angry.
I like
Damien,
it.
like idiots. Like this is why we hate them.
Yeah, ridiculous comment. I agree with you. Why would you say that a test series is an asterisk? Because the conditions weren't to your liking. Aggers, I expect better from him, to be honest with you. I know you have low expectations of certain people.
No, I
in the
like
English
Aggers.
media,
I like Aggers.
but yeah, it's a stupid comment to make. I agree. It's a test series at the end of the day. It's always about what suits them, Menners, unfortunately. I had a look. You were right in regards to some members of the English media, but you're also right about some of the reactions of the players as well. I saw an interview, I think it was with Ben Stokes, and some of the answers he gave were like one-word answers, very bland, not really adding any insight, not really wanting to explain what happened. Mate, you're getting paid a decent amount of money. Fans want to know why you've lost a test series. Surely you could have the decency to be a bit more expansive in explaining how it went wrong. Because at the end of the day, you're going to lose some test series, but at least explain it and be accountable.
I just want them to die by the sword of which they live by. Like, you're going to lose a few test matches if you play the way that you do. There's nothing wrong with that. I would rather you sit there and accept it and take it and say to yourself, we were the second best team on the day. If anything, Pakistan on the roads that they've put together in Multan, and actually since they've been able to host Test cricket in Pakistan, if anything, they've been too hospitable to every single guest that has come in. The wicket has been way too batter friendly for everyone involved. And to be honest, I mean, I think it was a lot more sporting the last two test matches of that series. Granted, England did a magnificent job to win a game, which they should be credited for, because ultimately their tactics, their plan A, which they never seem to deviate from, worked on a road in Multan. That's great. But if you can't adjust and adapt to be a good team, you're not going to win multiple test matches in a test series. Pakistan, just like anywhere else, okay, it might have been a little bit out of the ordinary what they did, a little bit unorthodox. But ultimately, when you go to a test series in India or a test series to Australia, every single test venue has a pitch that plays different to the test that you played before. Pakistan, if anything, were too hospitable over the time they've had test cricket back in Pakistan. And Zoltz was spot on with his response to, having worked as a statistician in my time as well. Stats by themselves don't really mean everything that you want them to be. And as a statistician, you don't accept that they're the be all and end all. They take with caveats, they take with not asterisks, but they take context to explain what's gone on in this situation. Oh, England scored 823. That's whatever it was, the second best test innings of all time. But what was the situation? They were playing on a road. They had to come back in the test match. They only wanted to bat one time in the match, and they played really well. But there's context to that. Same with that Sri Lanka 952 they put up in the mid-90s when they broke the record. Like, it's ridiculous. And cricket is a game of so many parameters and variables.
But I just
You're
want
going to get weird shit. Like,
I just want to say to Aggers that, so that means when Pakistan turns up to a green top at Headingley, because the conditions aren't to their liking, they can put an asterisk against that result. And I would also I think it's so hypocritical, because one thing that is not good for Test cricket is the pitches we saw, the sort of pitches we saw at Multan and in the previous tours to Pakistan, being flat decks, nothing for the bowlers, poor cricket. You don't want to see just slogging all the time with the bowlers not being able to do anything. So pitches are actually, that turn a little, are better for Test cricket. So England, who are trying to save Test cricket, should be like, we don't mind playing on pitches that are doing a bit of spin, and we're actually going to try and adjust our game a little bit so we don't get embarrassed. Instead, they just go, they made spinning pitches, these don't count. Just pathetic. Anyway, they go to New Zealand. Well, adapt, yeah. They're not
just
going
adapt.
to.
The accountability from Ben Stokes. Like,
No,
you're the
just
captain,
don't
and
expect
if you rock up to a press conference and deliver one-word answers, then honestly, you should think about your status as captain of the team. Because if you're not willing to front up and give a take or an opinion, then what are we doing here? Like, the world doesn't revolve around you.
What are we doing here? Exactly. Anyway, so England embarrassed themselves. Pakistan get the chocolates. I said before Gary Kirsten has quit, didn't I? The Pakistan white ball coach. So Dizzy Gillespie will bring them out here. So the shocks continued. We had New Zealand beating India in a test series. The first time India have lost a test series at home since 2012. They've won 18 consecutive test series. Just an incredible run from India comes to an end. You could not have picked one person in the world who would back New Zealand to win this series. Mitch Santa in the second test took 13 wickets to bowl New Zealand to what I think is one of the most significant test series wins by any nation in years. I can't think of a more significant series win than maybe since when Australia beat the West Indies back in 1995. I mean, the Kiwis did something Australia can't do. I mean, this came from nowhere. I don't think India played particularly well, which has given me some hope for the summer ahead. Damien, I mean, no one saw this coming. This has to be one of the biggest upsets in Test cricket history.
I completely agree with you, and I'm surprised it hasn't really permeated as much. Maybe I'm looking at it from a different vantage point, but I think this should be celebrated as you mentioned, one of the biggest upsets in cricketing history, and the way that they've gone about this series. And I'm going to New Zealand, funnily enough, this weekend, Menas, so I'll try and get a gauge on whether it's this whole period for New Zealand is being celebrated, because you could argue this is probably the greatest period, this last few weeks in New Zealand cricketing history. They defeated India, who are considered the titans of world cricket. And then the women's team have won the T20 World Cup against expectations and off the back of a long losing streak, and have managed a poor performance against Australia earlier in the campaign, turned it around, bit of good fortune, but turned it around to win the tournament. I mean, this should be celebrated, and get a gauge as to whether it's actually being celebrated locally.
I've got a tip for you. Start with a question about the All Blacks to get their attention, and then switch to the cricket. Like do the old bait and switch.
Black Caps.
Yeah, because if you say you want to ask them a cricket question, they'll just like saunter away. Daniel, how significant do you think this is?
They did it without Kane Williamson as well, which makes it all the more remarkable. Granted, like maybe it's just looking back in hindsight, but I look at the New Zealand team and good plays to spin. The likes of Devon Conway and Rachin Ravindra stood up. Two great sweepers, which I think is just such an effective tool when you go to India and play on their decks and in their conditions. And they've just quietly gone about their business. They've done something that I wish England would probably do a bit more of if we're sort of treading on old ground talking about them in Pakistan. But
Please don't.
You just look at the numbers, and everyone really chipped in. Will O'Rourke was superb with the new ball as well.
Look at the Indian numbers, though. The Indian batting numbers are not good, and they're coming out to bouncy wickets in Australia, which maybe they'll actually do better than the pitches they've been playing on. But if I'm India, I'm looking at my team thinking that's a poor performance.
I think one thing that they are lacking, and this might be an Achilles heel for them in Australia as well, is they are missing the Pujara type of player, the driver type of player who can really sit and grit through tough periods. There's just a lot of stroke makers in that team, and on their day, on good wickets, yeah, exactly. On good wickets, they could well go very well. Jaiswal, Sharma, Kohli, Sarfraz, Rishabh, KL Rahul, who's had his fragilities against the new ball when he's batted higher up the order, and then the likes of Jadeja and Ashwin. I think if the going gets tough and they need a grit, like they will miss someone like a Cheteshwar Pujara, who was such a thorn in the side of Australia on previous Australia tours. So, look, I think that's definitely one begging question for India coming out here to bring it to sort of now. But, yeah, full credit to New Zealand. They just stuck to a game plan and ultimately were brilliant in what they did.
So they are playing the third test that starts the end of the week here. A really interesting thing, though, because no one could see this result coming, and it sort of throws the World Test Championship table right up in the air now. India's still on top, but only ever so slightly ahead of Australia, who are, slightly ahead of Sri Lanka. And now New Zealand are in the reckoning. If they finish well, they could definitely make the final. None of this seemed likely couple of weeks ago before this series. And what I think it does do is Australia have a really good opportunity here. If they can dominate India in this series, they can put one foot in the final. They can't. I think it's still going to come down to Sri Lanka a little bit, but they have to do most of their work against India. And now the way India have performed, they probably actually have a chance to do that. But yeah, it just throws sort of like a four-way race now with South Africa in fifth spot, actually, a chance. So yeah, it's going to be a really exciting conclusion to the World Test Championship. Maybe the most exciting conclusion we've ever seen to the cycle.
The other side of the coin, though, potentially is, will India use that as a form of trying to atone, and they'll have the fire in the belly off the back of that embarrassment? That's the other thing in the back of my mind as well.
And the conditions will be different here. But anyway. All right. So we're running out of time. Let's get to Can't Let It Go. That little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to the wicketkeeper. The wicketkeeper today is Matthew Wade, in tribute to his retirement from international cricket. Who wants to go first? Damien, I know you've got a Can't Let It Go. Go for it.
Yeah, so Glenn Maxwell has just released his book. I know you love your cricket literature, Menners. He's released his book called The Showman. And, yeah, very interesting, some of the claims that he's made going back where it looked as if he was going to go to New South Wales. He was left out of the Shield side off the back of that particular pursuit. And even a claim that he made, you got to remember, Victoria were a reasonably successful side around the turn of the decade at the end of the 2000s, coming into the 2010s. And that's when Glenn Maxwell came into the squad. And he says that the culture around the place, amongst the players in particular, wasn't all that great. And I think he made the quote, or he repeated the quote that's been said before with a number of people where, probably the harshest critics of Victorians are amongst their own team, basically. So, yeah, I found that to be very interesting.
Yeah, in that, so there's an article in News Corp where he alleges that the chairman of selectors at the time said something about him under his breath about you shouldn't have gone to New South Wales. And this, you shouldn't have tried to go to New South Wales.
Yeah.
And this chairman of selectors has denied those comments. So it's getting a little sticky out there. I like it. Just on that Victorian dressing room, a couple of stories on that. There's always been a feeling that there's a lot of frustrated AFL players in the Victoria. Sorry, there's a failed AFL players. That the failed bit's important in the cricket Victoria dressing room, and that can come out sometimes. And there's also a very well-known story about when Simon Kadich pinned Michael Clark up against the wall after a test in the SCG, and Andrew McDonald, the current Australian coach, was playing in this test match. I think it was his first test. Someone said to him, "Oh, you okay?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry, that happens all the time in the Victorian dressing room." So I think dressing rooms overall have changed a lot. There was certainly a culture going back not that far ago, 10 or 15 years, where it's kind of a tough initiation, like everyone sort of gave you the treatment when you came in to see if you could take it. Anyway, good Can't Let It Go, Daniel.
Nothing major from me, just League Two ODIs are back in the calendar. There's a tri-series at Grand Prairie in Dallas, which is a beautiful cricket ground. One of my favourite places I've ever been to in terms of cricket. Scotland, USA and Nepal. Good win for Nepal today over Scotland, who are probably favourites along with the Dutch to win that tournament on the road to Cricket World Cup.
Yeah,
No.
If you're a smart person, if you've been following this podcast, Daniel has not given one right tip yet. In fact, when he tips someone, they end up putting in an all-time stinker of performance. What did you say about the New Zealand women's cricket team in the T20 World Cup? You said they could not win a game. You said they are going to be bad.
I don't think I went that far, but I didn't think they were going to get to the semi-finals. I did say to you, Menners, that if social media and podcasts were around in the 30s, I would have been able to stop Bradman in his prime. I reckon. I've got such a weird
touch.
Yeah, I don't know. Don't make whoever I've praised in the show from the bottom of my heart. I apologize because everything just seems to turn to shit.
Great. All right. Mike, Can't Let It Go. It's a little bit self-indulgent, but if you want to turn on the Sheffield Shield this Friday, New South Wales are playing Queensland at Cricket Central in Sydney. It's going to be a pretty handy bowling lineup for New South Wales. Josh Hazlewood is set to play his one warm-up game for the Test summer. Nathan Lyon will be there, Jackson Bird. And they're playing against, Marnus Labuschagne's Queensland. So I'm commentating all 4 days of that. Tune into that. It's going to be a good dose of domestic cricket with Manners at the helm, no doubt getting in trouble, saying inappropriate things, getting weird looks from the other commentators.
How was the Spring Challenge commentary, Manners? Did you enjoy it? Semi-finals?
It was good fun. It was the first time I've ever had to commentate on a Power Surge game. And boy, do I hate the Power Surge. Just stinks. But I will say they listened to me because I took Dobson and I took them aside and said, you have to make it clear that it's happening. The problem is when you're at the ground, they used to just put up on the scoreboard Power Surge. And if you're talking to your mate about, something, you miss it. And then all of a sudden you're like, there's two fielders only outside the circle. So this year they've got a whole huge video production for the Power Surge. I saw it at the WBBL last night. You can't miss it now. So anyway, Spring Challenge commentary was good. Loved it. Had a good time, except the second semi-final was rained out. So the Melbourne Stars, unfortunately, got eliminated with basically just, they didn't bat. All right. Well, that's it for Cricket Unfiltered. Daniel, where can the listeners catch up with you?
DG Beswick 1 across social medias, and there'll probably be an emerging cricket podcast out this week. Back on deck after a week away.
Yeah. You should start a tipping podcast where you just
no. Just my NFL same game multis are already bad enough for myself, let alone for anyone else. So,
Damien, where can the listeners catch up with you?
At Damo_Watts. I'll be a bit quiet the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm going to New Zealand. So, but if anyone has any recommendations to visit somewhere in New Zealand, put it in the comments.
Damien, I'm just searching through my emails here. I didn't see your request for annual leave come through. I don't know if I said
it verbally back in July, but sometimes recency bias takes over.
No, have a great time. Enjoy, and we'll catch up with you when you get back.
Thank you very
Listeners, thanks for tuning into Cricket Unfiltered. I'll be back soon. I'll be back soon with another podcast.